Hi, boys and girls. Welcome to our first online flipped learning math lesson. So, as you can see from the title of our screen, we're going to be talking about a fraction. What is a fraction? Okay, so um, before we get started, okay, I want you to look at these two boxes and I want you to think about what my rule is. So I have a rule here. And in my inbox, I have 1/2, 1/4, 1/10, 1/9, 1/12, 1/3. In my outbox, I have 2/10, 3/9, 5/10, 4/7, 6/12, and 3/15. So what do you think my rule is? Stop the video, think about it, and then come back to me. All right, so if you said that my in rules all had a 1 in the numerator, you would be correct. These all have a 1 in the numerator, and the ones in the out do not have a 1 in the numerator. So today we are going to be talking about the instance when a fraction has a 1 in the numerator. There is a special name for it, okay? So today for our math goal is just a fraction review. So this is just a review of stuff that you did in 4th grade. So what I know. So please write down everything you know about fractions. So stop the video, write your math goal, write down fraction review, and then write down what I know and write down everything you know about fractions in your math notebook. Okay? Then come back to me. All right. Now that you've written that down, and tomorrow we will share in class what you know about fractions. Okay? What does this math board show? So stop the video, think about it, and then come back to me. Okay. So if you said it shows a hole, yes, it does have a hole, and it's also labeled with our fraction pieces, right? And you notice again the 1 over the 1 is in the numerator of all these fractions. Okay. So think about what it means and think about what we're leading into. Okay. All right. So, what fraction does each part of the halves bar represent? So, these half bars represent what? Yes, each one represents a half. This is a half, this is half. It's half of a whole, right? It's half of a whole. All right, so what do all the fractions have in common? Right? We talked about it. They all have a 1 in the numerator. Do you remember what we call fractions like this? Okay, so stop the recording, see if you can think about it for a moment, see if you can remember what we call these. Okay, all right, if you said that they're called unit fractions, you would be correct. So a unit fraction has a 1 in the numerator. So remember, numerator is the top number, denominator is the bottom number. Okay, all right, so we said the numerator, what's the numerator? The numerator has, what do we notice about the numerator? The numerators are all a 1. The numerator is the top number, the denominator is the bottom number. And what does the bottom number tell me? Stop the video, think about it, and then come back to me. So if you told me that the denominator tells me how many equal parts there is, how many parts it's divided into, you'd be correct. So this 2 tells me that this whole is broken up into 2 parts. The 4 tells me here that this is broken up, the whole is broken up into 4 equal parts. Remember, they have to be equal parts. The 8 tells me I have 8 equal parts. Okay, so do this with me. You're going to find out that I do a lot of hand gestures, a lot of hand movement, a lot of songs. So do it with me. You're going to put your hand out like this, okay, right in front of you. And this is going to be our fraction bar. Okay, fraction bar. This is a fraction bar. Numerator is on the top, denominator is on the bottom. Say it with me. Numerator, denominator. Numerator, denominator. Denominator, numerator. Denominator, numerator. The denominator tells you how many parts you have in all, how many parts it's broken into, and the numerator tells you how many of those equal parts you have. Okay? All right, so let's talk about that a little bit. The numerator is the number of unit fractions in the fraction. We already talked about that, right? Numerator, how many parts you have. The denominator of the unit fraction is the number of equal parts, how many equal parts you have. Now, as the denominator of the unit fraction increases, the number of equal parts increases. So let's go back and look here. So here we have a denominator of 2. I have 2 equal parts. This I have 4 in my denominator, so that means I have 4 equal parts. I'm getting more equal parts. I'm getting more equal parts, but they're becoming smaller. So the way I like thinking about this, think about a pizza, right? You can have a whole pizza, that means you get the whole thing. Or you can have half of a pizza. So if you get half of a pizza, you have to slice it in half, and you're only going to get half of it. So one whole is bigger than one half, right? 1/4, right? You have to divide it up into 4 equal pieces. Now it tells me I have to share this with 4 people. So if I have to share a whole one pizza with 4 people, that means I have to divide it up into 4 equal parts. I'm going to get a smaller part. So it's a little bit trickier, right? Because you think about numbers and you think about the bigger the number, the bigger it is. But in fractions, it's the opposite. When the denominator gets bigger, it's actually the pieces are getting smaller because you're having to share with more people, or you're cutting it up into more pieces. So it's a little bit trickier. So take a moment to think about that. It's different, right? As the number gets bigger in the denominator, what you actually have actually gets smaller. Okay. All right. So back to our thing. So as the denominator of the unit fractions increases, the size of each part decreases. That's what we just talked about, right? As the denominator gets bigger, the more you have to share with, the smaller the pieces you're going to get. You're going to get a smaller piece. The more equal parts the same whole is divided into, the smaller each part must be. So you have to divide it more, it's got to get smaller, right? So think about it with food. That's an easy way to think about it, okay? All right, moving on. So equal parts, the denominator increases and the size of each part decrease. I just already talked about that. The more equal parts, the smaller the parts become, okay? Which unit fraction is bigger, 1/4 or 1/8? So stop the video, write that down in your math notebook. Which one's bigger, 1/4 or 1/8, and tell me why, okay? And then come back to me. Okay, if you said that 1/4 is bigger, you would be correct. Why is 1/4 bigger? Because it's only divided up into 4 equal parts. So that means you only have to share with 4 people or cut something into fourths, so the parts are going to be bigger. The eighths are smaller because you have to divide them up into smaller pieces. Okay? Okay, so how could we build a whole? So think about, we were talking about unit fractions, right? Unit fractions have a 1 in the numerator. So how can we make a whole? So think about it. Stop and think about it. How can you make a whole with a unit fraction? Okay, and then come back to me when you think you know. Okay. All right. So we can build a whole. For example, we can build a whole by adding up the unit fractions. So if I took a whole and divided up into 3 equal parts, that's going to be, this is a third, this is a third, this is a third. So I can divide this up into thirds, add them up together. A third plus a third plus a third makes one whole. And you can do that for any of the unit fractions, okay? Just by simply adding them up together until you reach a whole, right? And if you remember about adding fractions from fourth grade, the denominator stays the same, right? So 3, 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3, which is the same thing as 3 out of 3, which is equal to my 1 whole. 3 out of 3 is equal to 1 whole, okay? All right, build other fractions. Like I said, we can build other fractions. It doesn't matter. How can unit fractions be used to build other fractions? Well, any fraction that is not a unit fraction can be built by adding unit fractions. So for example, if I wanted to build 3/5 here, see where's my little pointer? So 3/5, if I wanted to build 3/5, all I got to do is add 1/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5. That equals 3/5. It's not a whole, but I can still build it. I can build the 3/5 by adding 1/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5, okay? The denominator of a fraction tells the number of unit fractions in the whole. The example 3/5 is made up of 5 unit fractions, right? Because the denominator tells me how many parts I have in all, right? The numerator of the fraction tells the number of unit fractions in the fraction. For example, 3/5 is made up of 3 unit fractions. 3 of the unit fractions makes 3/5. Okay? One thing that I forgot to mention before we end this lesson is I forgot to mention at the beginning that a fraction is a number. Okay? It's a number between 0 and 1. So between 0 and 1, I think this is showing it backwards on the camera, right? So I'll just do this. Between 0 and 1 is our fraction, okay? So a fraction is a number. It's bigger than 0, but smaller than 1. So what is a fraction? Tell me. Yes, a fraction is a number that's between 0 and 1. It's bigger than 0, but less than 1. Okay? Okay, so we're reached the end of our lesson. So in your math notebook, write down what I learned and tell me something that you learned, and then we'll talk about it in class. So tell me something that you learned from this lesson. And proof of learning by solving a problem. So I want you to prove that you learned something by solving a problem similar to what I did in the video. So feel free to go back and look at the video as many times as you want. Stop in parts of the video if you need clarification. And then if you still have a question or reflection, something that you can reflect about, or a connection that you made to what you learned about daily, about this topic and a connection to this, you can write a reflection on here, or you can write a question. If you still have a question for me about what a unit fraction is, write it down here in your math notebook, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow. So remember, you need to have what I learned, you need to write that down, what I learned, and then actually write down something that you learned. You also need to write proof of learning by solving a problem, and you actually have to solve a problem involving what did we learn. I'm not going to tell you. Go back and watch the video if you don't know what you learned. Reflection question, write a question that you have about this, or a reflection, something, a connection that you made to your learning. Okay?